They say her name is still whispered through the attic walls, not by ghosts, but by the house itself. No one remembers when the last Coleman died, but somehow the candle in the upstairs window keeps burning. You step quietly across the warped floorboards, the wood groaning beneath your weight like a tired memory. The air is thick with dust, but not unpleasant. It smells faintly of old cedar, dried herbs, and the forgotten breath of time. The windows are smeared with the grey fingerprints of a century's worth of storms, and outside, the trees sway gently, as if they remember something you've yet to learn. It's quiet, not peaceful, more like listening to a room that once knew too much. This is the Coleman house. It rests just off the old river road in rural Virginia, surrounded by weeds and crows and a stillness that makes the skin behind your ears prickle. They say it's been empty since the 1950s, though every now and then someone spots a flicker of candlelight through the attic window. The town doesn't talk much about the Colemans anymore, or perhaps they never did. You wander deeper into the parlour, running your hand along the back of a velvet chair draped in a film of dust so delicate it breaks like fog at your touch. A photograph sits on the mantel, cracked and sun-faded. A woman, unsmiling. 3 children, standing too still. Their eyes seem to know something they shouldn't. No one knows exactly what happened here, but stories linger, softly, like spider silk. There were whispers of illness, of disappearances, of a garden that grew too wild for the climate. And of course, the attic door. Locked, always. But it creaks slightly now, as if exhaling after holding its breath for too long. You pause. The silence isn't empty. It listens. Some say this house is haunted, but not by ghosts. Haunted instead by something heavier. Generations of memory, perhaps. A family too quiet for too long. It makes you wonder, can silence itself be an inheritance? Let's begin there, shall we? With the Coleman family, not in the grave, not in the attic, but in the moments before everything changed, before the children fell ill, before the father vanished, before the town stopped asking questions, before the whispers began. And if stories like this settle into your thoughts, let me know gently in the comments. Do old homes speak to you too? Or is it simply us, filling the quiet with ghosts? Close your eyes if you wish. We're only just beginning. The year is 1863, and you are Sarah Coleman. You wake before the sun, as you always do. The house sleeps, but you don't. Not really. Sleep has become a polite stranger these past few months, since the war came close enough to smell. Smoke from distant cannon fire sometimes drifts down into the valley, curling into your kitchen like an uninvited guest. You light the stove, then pull on your shawl, hands rough and stained from a lifetime of dirt and tinctures. Outside, your garden waits. You planted it yourself. Not just the vegetables, though there are rows of beans, squash, and tomatoes that climb the broken fence like stubborn children, but the herbs too. Chamomile, foxglove, valerian, and something no one asks about. Something that blooms red in the shadowed part of the yard, where even the bees seem nervous. You bend low to check the roots, humming softly. You've always believed plants grow better when they're spoken to, or maybe it just makes the silence feel less heavy. John is still asleep. He came home from the war not quite whole. He stares through things now, not at them. He speaks more to the fire than to you. When he touches your hand, it's with the fingers of someone who's forgotten softness. But you love him. At least you did. And now you care for him out of something deeper than love, something heavier. Your children stir as the morning rises. Anna with her thin blonde hair and freckled nose. Thomas, curious and clumsy. Eli, the baby, who doesn't yet know the meaning of sorrow. You smile at them over porridge, and they smile back. It's enough, for now. The townsfolk come sometimes, for teas, for ointments, for whispered questions. They call you that wise woman behind your back. Never quite doctor, never quite witch. Somewhere in between. And you answer their needs with soft hands and a listening heart. But lately, the needs have grown darker. A young wife comes, begging for something to stop the bruises from showing. A mother with her 5th miscarriage asks if the soil is cursed. A soldier's brother brings a feverish child and watches your eyes too closely. They never say what they're really asking for, but you understand. You always do. One day, a neighbor finds her cat stiff beneath your rosebush. "Poison," she says, "natural or not." You hear her words but say nothing. Only tend to your herbs. Only keep your garden locked with the old gate latch. That summer the wind blows strange. Plants bloom out of season. Children catch colds that don't behave like colds. And every morning you kneel in the dirt, digging your hands into the earth like a prayer or a secret. You don't talk much, Sarah. Never have. But your eyes say enough. And sometimes, when you smile too gently, people wonder if you're mourning or remembering. Perhaps both. And so, life continues. Until it doesn't. They said Sarah's garden could cure anything, the townspeople would later whisper, but it left a taste no one could name. And if you lived in that time, if you drank her teas, wore her balms, would you trust her? Or would you wonder what else she kept under the soil? If you're still listening with quiet curiosity, I'd love to know, do you think healing and harm can come from the same hand? Now, let's walk a little further into the Coleman story, the part where the children start to disappear. You were 7 when your sister stopped breathing. It was early autumn, the kind of morning where the sun slips in like honey through the windows, and everything feels warm for no reason. She'd been coughing for days, but children always coughed in the fall. It was the cold, or the smoke, or the wind off the hills. That's what Mama said anyway. Anna was only 9. She had a voice like silver thread, always humming, always making up songs about the chickens or the stars. You remember how her hands were always warm, even when the nights dipped low and the frost crept across the windows. And then she just stopped waking up. You don't remember crying, not exactly. What you remember is Mama sitting by the window, the sunlight soft on her face, her lips moving silently like she was speaking to someone who wasn't there. She didn't scream. She didn't sob. She just rocked slowly in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Papa stood in the doorway and said nothing. He hadn't said much since the war, anyway. The doctor came with his leather bag and stiff shoes. He listened, nodded, frowned, called it consumption of the lungs, though you heard him whisper something else to your uncle. Something about how the girl's lips were too pale, too fast. He didn't stay long. The following spring, Thomas fell sick too. It started with fevers, sweats in the night, a strange greyness behind his eyes. Mama brewed something bitter for him, a tea she wouldn't let you taste. He got better, for a while. Then he was gone, just like Anna. You began to sleep with one eye open, hugging Eli close to your chest. The neighbors sent food, condolences, but their glances held something different now. Pity, maybe, or suspicion. 2 dead children in 1 year, 3 within 10. One of the girls fell from the well, they said. You weren't allowed to see the body. Just heard the thud when I closed the lid on the little box and nailed it shut. And always, Mama was quiet. She would hum while stirring her pots, press warm cloths to your forehead, whisper lullabies when you cried at night. But something in her had retreated, like a bird that no longer trusted the sky. Sometimes you thought she loved you too much. Other times, not enough. You told yourself it was just bad luck. Families lose children. That's what people said. Especially poor families, out in the country, with bad water and long winters. But you noticed the way people avoided Mama's eyes at church. You noticed how the wind never quite touched her garden anymore. And deep down, even as a child, you began to wonder. Would you have asked? Would you have said anything at all? Or would you have stayed silent too, and listened to the house breathe softly through the walls? If you're still with me, thank you. The next part of the Coleman tale is where someone goes missing. Not a child this time, but a man who never said goodbye. You remember the morning he left because of the boots. Your father always lined them by the door, polished, upright, almost military. Even after the war had long since ended, he kept the habit, shined them, placed them side by side, like everything in his life needed to be accounted for, controlled. But that morning in 1874, they weren't there. Mama said he went into town to buy horse feed, simple as that. She said it like she was reading a list. She didn't look at you when she said it. But you knew he wouldn't leave without his boots. John Coleman was a quiet man, but his silence was heavy. He never shouted, never hit. But his eyes were distant, far away even when he was sitting at the table. Sometimes he'd stare at the wall for hours, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. After the war he came back different. Not broken, but folded. Like something inside him had been creased too sharply and never smoothed out. He used to carry you on his shoulders, before the war. You remember that? You remember how high the world looked from up there, how safe you felt in his arms. But those memories felt borrowed now, as if they belonged to a different child, or a different man. When he disappeared, no one came to search. No notices were posted. No dogs sniffed the trail. The town said, "Well, he's a man. Men leave. They start again somewhere else." But even at your age, you understood that some people don't start over. They just vanish. Your uncle asked Mama if she'd heard anything, any argument, any trouble. She just smiled, that tired, delicate smile of hers, and said, "He's a grown man. He'll come back when he's ready." But he didn't. Weeks passed, then months. The fields overgrew. The barn roof sagged further. You kept expecting to see his silhouette on the hill at dusk, the way he used to appear after a day's work, shirt loose, hat tilted back, humming, like some old tune from before the war. Instead, there was nothing, no word, no letter, not even a rumor. And the strange thing? Life went on. Mama stopped setting his place at the table. She took over his chores. She never said his name again, not once. It was as if he'd been tucked away, folded into a quiet drawer somewhere in her mind, and locked there. You asked once, just once, if he was ever coming home. She touched your hair, kissed your forehead, and said, "He's where he's meant to be now." You didn't ask again. If someone you loved disappeared without a trace, would you grieve? Or wait? Or would you bury the question, like Mama buried everything else? We're getting closer now. There's a room we haven't entered yet, a room upstairs that was always locked. And one night, someone opened the door. You were never allowed to go upstairs. That was Mama's rule. The door at the top of the staircase was always closed, always locked, and always cold. Even in July, when the rest of the house swelled with thick heat and the windows stuck in their frames, that room remained untouched by sun or season. "It's just for storage," Mama would say, "nothing worth fussing over." And yet, your eyes always drifted toward it. Sometimes, when the wind caught the windows just right, the door would rattle slightly in its frame. And sometimes, Late at night, you could swear you heard footsteps above your ceiling, slow, measured, as if someone were pacing or waiting. No one ever mentioned it. Not even your older cousins who came to visit in the summers. They'd glance up the stairs, lower their voices, and sleep a little closer to the fire. Until the day Margaret found the key. It was winter, and the snow had trapped everyone indoors. The firewood was low, and the windows had frosted so thick you could trace your name into the glass, and it would stay for hours. Margaret was the bold one, older by 2 years, with sharp eyes and quicker hands. You watched her poke around Mama's sewing desk, pull back a drawer that stuck, and retrieve a small brass key that looked older than the house itself. She didn't even ask, just went straight up the stairs and turned the lock. You followed, of course, quiet as a cat, heart pounding so loud you thought it might give you away. When the door opened, a soft rush of air brushed your face, not cold, not warm, just stale. Still. Inside, the room was smaller than you imagined. Sloped ceiling, one window, half covered with lace that had yellowed and sagged. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars. So many jars, each neatly labelled in Mama's hand. Dried petals, crushed roots, powders in hues you couldn't name. Some smelled sweet, others sharp, metallic. And then there were the boxes, stacked in the far corner, letters, photographs, one of Papa in uniform, one of Anna, one of a girl you didn't recognize, her face scratched out. On a small table sat a book, thick, worn, the pages warped at the corners. Margaret opened it. You saw diagrams, lists, mixtures, names, dosages, notes in Latin scribbled alongside your family's names. And then you saw your own. Just a date, no explanation. Margaret said nothing. She closed the book, placed it back, and turned to you. "We shouldn't be in here," she whispered. And she was right. You never spoke of it again. Mama never mentioned the key, though she surely noticed. But the attic door was relocked the next day, and no one went back up. At least, not while Mama was alive. Years later, you'd dream of that room, of the jars, the quiet window, and the book with your name in it, and you'd wonder, not what she was doing, but why she stopped. What would you have done? If your family's secrets were preserved like herbs in a jar, would you open them to the air, or keep them sealed? Let's follow those dreams now, into the years after Mama's passing, when the house grew quieter, but never truly silent. Mama died on a Wednesday. No storm, no signs, just a soft breath that didn't come back. She passed in her sleep, in the same rocking chair she always sat in by the window. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, like she was waiting for something, or maybe someone. There was no funeral, just a quiet burial in the family plot behind the house, next to the children she'd outlived, and the husband no one ever found. A few neighbours came, but they didn't stay long, and when they left for good. As if some invisible thread had finally been cut. Afterward, the house sat still for a while, as if grieving or exhaling. You were grown by then, married, children of your own. But something kept pulling you back. That old house on the hill, with its brittle wallpaper and sagging porch. It didn't ask for you, but it waited. So you returned. Only for a week, you said. Just to gather things. Just to sort through what remained. But time bends differently in that place. Days stretch. Nights linger. You found yourself speaking in hushed tones, even when you were alone. You wandered through each room, touched old dresses, opened drawers lined with letters faded to ghosts. You lit a candle in the parlour, just like Mama used to do, and the flame leaned east. Always east. The attic door remained locked. Some things never change. But what struck you most wasn't the silence. It was the weight of it, the way it filled the corners, the way it pressed against your ribs when you stood too long in one spot. This wasn't absence. It was presence, a quiet, humming presence that had no face but many memories. The townspeople spoke little of the Colemans now. When they did, it was in lowered voices. That old family, they'd mutter. Strange lot. But no one ever accused. No one ever claimed. Too much time had passed, and yet you felt it, in the way the wind moved differently a row on the garden gate, in the way the air shifted when you stepped over the threshold. It wasn't fear, it was familiarity. Some legacies are passed in name, others in stories. But some are passed in silence, in the way a mother teaches her daughter to look away, in the way a child learns which doors not to open, in the way you too find yourself humming when you stir tea, without knowing why. Do you think we inherit more than blood? Do you think silence itself can be taught, like a recipe or a lullaby? If you're still with me, you already know the answer. But there's one more secret yet to be uncovered. It's buried, not in the garden, not in the well, not even in memory. It's beneath the floorboards. And it's waiting to be read.
It was 1948 when they found it. The Coleman house had stood empty for years by then, windows dark, shingles rotting, the garden overtaken by weeds that reached up like arms. No one lived there, not really, but a traveling mason had been hired by a distant relative to assess the foundation. Just in case we sell, they'd said. The mason wasn't looking for history. He was looking for cracks in the beams, soft wood, termite signs. But under a warped plank in the parlor floor, he found something else. A box. Simple, wooden, bound with rusted iron hinges and a clasp that had long since lost its lock. Inside, a book. The ledger. He flipped through it by lantern light, dust rising with every page. It wasn't a journal. It wasn't a diary. It was something else entirely. Neatly inked columns filled the pages, names, dates, recipes, not for food but for remedies, mixtures, teas, powders, elixirs. Some pages had small stains, pressed petals, smudges of ash, maybe blood. It was meticulous, precise, almost clinical. And then, among the entries, the names started to look familiar. Coleman, Anna, 1865. Fever, Thomas, 1866. Bleeding root plus valerian. Eli, 1872. Quieted breath. No explanations, no emotions, just entries, doses, observations. Then came names that didn't belong to the family. Neighbors, children, midwives, all listed in the same careful script. Some pages marked resolved, others referred. A few marked only with a symbol, a circle with a line through it. The final page was different. It held only one line. One left. No name, no date, just those two words centered on the page beneath a faint thumbprint in faded ink. The mason didn't stay the night. He closed the book, returned it to the box, and left it on the parlor table. Said nothing to anyone except that the house felt wrong, like it remembered you walking in. The box was never seen again. So, me say the ledger ended up in a museum vault. Others say it was burned quietly by a family member who couldn't bear to know what it truly meant. There are even rumors that it still sits in the house, beneath the same floorboard, waiting to be opened by the next set of hands brave, or foolish, enough to pry it loose. But no one knows. What we do know is this. The Coleman legacy didn't vanish. It simply slipped underground, into stories, into superstition, into the little hesitations people still have when they pass the old house at dusk. Because something once lived there, and perhaps, in some way, still does. If this story has lingered with you softly, I wonder, what do you think one left meant? Was it a warning, a confession, or something else entirely? We have just one chapter left now, the house itself, still standing, still watching. Let's return to where we began. The house is still there. Not far from the bend in the road where the old fence leans into the earth and the trees seem to bow in passing. You might miss it if you aren't looking. Just a shadow among pines, a slouching relic wrapped in vines and silence. They say no one lives there. But the curtains move sometimes, when the wind is low and the moon is full, as if someone has just stepped back from the window, as if someone is watching. The porch sags where the boards have rotted, and the paint has peeled into curling flakes. Yet nothing has collapsed. The roof still holds, the walls still stand. The house, despite it all, endures. And when you walk by, quietly, respectfully, you might hear something. Not a voice, not a cry, just breathing. Soft and slow, like sleep. Like someone long forgotten is still inside, resting, remembering. They say places remember things, that walls hold echoes, that a chair, if rocked often enough, might continue rocking after the sitter is gone. And if that's true, then the Coleman house remembers everything. It remembers Sarah's garden, lush with secrets. It remembers children's laughter and then their silence. It remembers the creak of boots that never came home. And it remembers the room upstairs, locked again perhaps, but never truly empty. You walk past and feel it, that hum beneath the skin, that sense that you are not entirely alone, even when you are. But it doesn't feel cruel. It feels tired, like a story that's been told too many times, but still isn't finished. You pause, one last time at the gate. The wind stirs. A bird calls, then falls quiet. And just as you're about to turn away, the attic window catches the last light of dusk. And something flickers there, only for a moment. Then nothing. Maybe the house isn't haunted. Maybe it just breathes differently. Maybe it only wants to be remembered. And, if you're still here listening, thank you. For walking with me through this tale, for sitting with the silence, for honoring the ghosts that don't scream, but whisper. If these quiet stories speak to you, gently subscribe and let me know your thoughts. Until next time, sleep well.